Okay, so I'm joined by Danny Brown, Infrastructure Director of Segro. So Segro are a developer of logistics parks in the UK and the wider globe as well. And I think arguably at the moment you're probably delivering one of the largest logistics schemes in the UK, about to kick off. And for that you've chosen to use NEC. Part of the reason you've chosen that, I believe, is because of the early warning process and the risk management process. And what I wanted to understand is, as a client, what is the benefit to you in using the early warning process?
I think the early warning process probably sits in a couple of places. The main benefit is really it's striking a strong collaboration between the contractor and client in our world. By knowing each other's kind of, issues that come up. I mean, the contractor at the end of the day is to apportion risk. And we need to manage our own risk that we've not been able to buy through the contract, as long with the contractor helping manage their own. So, we generally use an option A lump sum in the developer world, because if I know the price up front, I can appraise the scheme and decide whether to proceed with it or not. But then through the early warning process is what we do is start to understand if the contractor's getting under commercial pressure or not, and also if the risks that we've held back are actually getting realised early in the contract and we've got budgetary pressure. So at the end of the day, it's all about assumptions in how the outturn cost is going to land.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Who would you say generally leads the early warning process within the wider industry?
I mean, I guess you've got the three roles, being employer in NEC. You could have a designer separately appointed, along with the contractor. Ultimately, most of the risk is going to sit between the employer and contractor.
Yeah.
And generally, I'd say the contractor has the greater numbers, for one, in terms of people looking at the different elements of the project. The employer's got a smaller professional team. And I would say the contractor's probably got more of a vested interest, because inevitably they're trying to identify where risk exists and how to either manage that risk through an investment by the employer or to reduce the risk that they have themselves.
Yeah.
So generally probably contractor more than any other organisation as a rule.
Okay. So over the years that I've used NEC, my personal opinion is that the early warning process can almost be seen as a precursor to a claim type of scenario.
Okay.
Now I know you're quite an advocate of creating culture. So over the years we've worked together, I've seen that in action.
Yeah.
So how do you help create the right culture so that early warnings are a risk management tool as opposed to being a precursor to a claim tool?
That's a good question. I think I probably see it a bit more like, if you consider something like quality assurance, which is a bit more established, in the way it works. I remember in early days in my career, I had a quality audit and gave, I think it was 13 sort of NCRs, corrective actions, and I was looked at in the business as, that project's going wrong, what are you doing? And I actually had the highest performing quality product.
Yes.
Because the team were looking for these things, addressing them, and it's kind of this continuous improvement piece. So I guess being vulnerable internally in that organisation was important, and you can liken that to any kind of contract then. The more open you are, the more transparent you are, probably the other thing that you've got to do is establish that from day one. If you start with a culture of don't tell them, and keeping things back, that trust won't exist. And the early warning and the collaboration you can get around that, it's simply about trust. And I've got some great examples whereby actually a contractor will help me with my employer side risks and vice versa. So that builds trust. You're helping each other. You both want to win on this. It's stopping that zero-sum game where I win, you lose. That's the unhealthy part. That's the adversarial part. That means people just get so distracted and all the energy goes into that thing, not developing something that works for both of you.
Yeah. I like your example of NCRs because the teams which perform highest are the ones that fail the most. I'm sure you've read that in many a book. It's some great examples of that, so thank you.
Yeah, we do.
What advice would you give to a contractor so that when they present their early warning, it's not met with defensiveness, it actually creates a collaborative conversation?
Great one, I see it's quite a bit. I think there's probably three pieces of advice I would give. I think the first one is be clear on your principle behind it first. I think if you start to use the early warning process for throwing loads of things at a wall, hoping one will stick, that just frustrates people. And especially on an employer's side now, because I've worked for a contractor for a lot of my career, if I've got a small team, I can't, bring that team into looking at 100 early warnings if 90 of them don't really have any merit necessarily. So you're just striking that balance between volume and, relevancy. So I think that's the first thing. Be clear on why in the contract and the apportionment of risk it is an early warning you're raising. I think the second part is probably for me being really careful about your language. Quite often the NEC is written in basic English for lay people or informed to understand.
There's no Latin in NEC.
Yeah, exactly. So if you revert then to a kind of ICE fifth approach, as I used to have, and start quoting clause numbers, maybe you do need a clause number in there to answer my first point, but don't rewrite the clause and don't hold people's feet to the fire. It's the early warning is simply a conversation, so treat it like that. Be really kind of open to suggestion.
Yeah, I like that.
So I think that's probably, they're the two things that would land best. I think the other part to that, when you look at the dynamic, particularly as we see here, I think if commercial people only participate in the early warning process, you do get that more direct conversation, or direct, you owe me this money, because that's what they're good at doing. You balance that out with the wider production dynamic, you tend to get people that want a relationship that works. Not that most people don't, but their job is to look after money. The production team are kind of more centred around that continuity, that longer term, that how can we help each other, probably a little more so. So just balancing the two off. Don't as a production lead ever say that's their job, because it's not as yours.
An holistic team approach. Absolutely. Okay. Can you tell us about a time where an early warning has saved you or saved the company or the project delays and additional costs?
I think plenty actually. One good one I had actually, which is simple as last week. I've got an option E contract at the minute, so the contractor gets paid cost plus fee.
Cost plus fee, yeah.
My risk pretty much on every respect in terms of the outturn budget. And what I was noticing, and this involves quite a lot of stabilisation using lime and cement, this particular scheme and the issue, I was noticing what I felt was a lack of real kind of data management around it, decision by data. The cement and lime was being thrown into the ground and stabilised, but I wasn't sure that it was achieving the specification. It was exceeding the specification at my cost. So I raised that as an early warning, called for a risk reduction meeting, and actually just looking at the figures this morning from last week, the production was maintained as above the target rate, but the actual amount of powders being used, probably about 2/3 of what was originally going in. So that's helped establish, and I took an action for the contractor in that case to actually define a way that we could measure and look at daily how that powder was being used. So we're all contributing together. I've got a skill set I could offer, why wouldn't I? It's my money at the end of the day, but the contractor's really willing to work with me and actually reduce that cost, which is hundreds of thousands of pounds over the lifestyle of cycle of the project to go.
Okay. You mentioned something there, reducing your cost as the client, the developer. So that's a very good question of where's the advantage to the contractor? Why would they want to be engaging with early warnings? Okay, the contractors mandate they have to do that, but where's the advantage to them as a contractor in that proactive approach?
I don't think there's probably a commercially direct advantage. The more they spend, the more fee. It reduces the risk, because at the end of the day, option E isn't without some teeth in it. So we've got things like disallowed costs that we can start to look towards, but that gets quite difficult territory. So I think it saves us moving into an adversarial approach for the scheme. It also allows, if they're going to work with me in that way, that's kind of how the next projects will come about successfully. And it might not be a single action tender with that contractor, but they're certainly going to be in the list and in my thoughts if they're behaving in a way that supports us. I mean, at the end of the day, they're a trusted contractor, because option E is going to be quite a difficult place to go to.
Not a very frequently used version option E, is it? Especially with the private developer as well.
Of course it's not, no. So it kind of, for me, allows more of a reputational piece, but they're honouring the trust that I put in them by giving them the opportunity to help us on this particular scheme.
Okay. Perhaps the final question now, the most important one. Who is better at barbecuing? Australians or the English?
Oh wow. Yeah, there's an insightful question. Where do I go with that? I think it depends on your definition of success.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I'm going with, if your definition of success is a kind of a nice sausage that's kind of charred within an inch of its life, I think the British and English will win out. And if you want high quality in Barbie territory, I'm going to have to admit you've probably got to look a little further down south for that.
Okay. I think we've got a fairly decisive answer on that one.
Definitely.
Thank you very much, Danny Brown.
Yeah, more than welcome, Chris Jones. Absolute pleasure.